You found it! You have found that treasure you've been looking for. But the truth is, it's been looking for you all along. Welcome to Universal Grammar of Story, an inheritance from your literary ancestors to enhance your writing life or your practice in narrative medicine or Jungian analysis or your stage, film, or screen directing career. Anything to do with stories. This theory belongs to you. And here's the door. Open it. It's been waiting for you. This is a 4-part series that looks into the foundation and context for Universal Grammar of Story. We look at what it is that calls us to write, the way we use language in response to that call, and how the very words we use in everyday speech can empower or weaken us as writers. We look very briefly at the core narrative theories of writing, and we look more in depth at the myth and mystical philosophy of writing. For this first part, we're just looking at what is the universal grammar of story and what influenced it coming into being. The foundation and context. In the world of mythopoetic writing, if you crave to write, you are a writer. So claim it. Whether you're 10 or 110, whether you have written thousands of pages or you haven't put a single word to print yet, you have within you the capacity to write everything you are destined to write. You just need to know where it is and how to find it. You have quite naturally the intellectual, linguistic, emotional, the psychological, intuitive, and physical wisdom you need to bring beautiful, nourishing stories into this world. Yes, we do have a physical wisdom. It's that part of us that reacts without the brain being engaged. It's when a baseball comes screaming at you and suddenly your body makes a decision based on a calculation and executes an action without your mind being involved at all. You find yourself suddenly out of the way, whereas this camera, which didn't have that wisdom, wasn't so lucky. We haven't identified yet any particular genes related to storytellers or creative writing, but I believe it's only a matter of time before that happens. And those of you who know my work in phenomenology will understand why I think it's going to be on the number 15 or number 6 chromosomes that we find the first ones. For Harriet Dorr, those genes triggered her desire to write when she was 72 years old, her first story. At 74, she published Stones for Ibarra, and she won a National Book Award. It became a fine movie with Glenn Close and Keith Carradine. In the world of mythopoetic writing, stories provide more than passing amusements. They provide for certain vital needs of the writer and the audience. These are technical, philosophical, mythological, and psychosocial needs that do more than entertain. They sustain a society. The ancient Greeks understood this very well, and they set about to make sure that their writers had all of the resources, education, and mentorship that they needed to bring forth great stories to sustain their society. Once a year, they took the best of their writers and they celebrated the triumphs of their stories at the Festival of Dionysus, where at a sacred theater, the great writers competed for one another for the finest stories. These plays were free to the public, but they were more than just plays. Everyone was expected to attend. It was all paid for by the government, who sustained the writers, the actors, the set crew. No tickets had to be bought. It was seen as a religious service, as a way for the community to speak to heaven and receive messages back. I took a group of my own writers to the Theater of Dionysus, where I taught them universal grammar of story, and it was magical what came out of their work being in that amazing place. The ancient Greeks made sure that their writers had mentors to guide and educate them in creating beautiful stories. We don't have that in our time. There are some wonderful graduate programs in writing. There are some brilliant literary salons that nurture writers. And there are writing groups and conferences that people can attend from time to time. But we don't have the lifelong mentors to sculpt and guide us. And so I have taken the great mentors from the ancient world up into the present and gathered them into one place so that you would have a resource to turn to. So who are these guys? Well, I've taken the logic of Aristotle and the metaphysics of Heraclitus, who told us that everything changes into its opposite in time. So think again about that enemy. I've taken the philosophy of Hegel, who took Heraclitus one step further by saying it isn't just things that change into their opposite in time, but it's also ideas. As soon as we make a decision and put it in play in the world, it encounters an exception, and we have to amend the decision to fit the exception, and then it encounters another exception, which we have to amend the decision for. And this continues on through time until at last our great idea turns out to be exactly the opposite of what we had intended. I have taken the beautiful emotion of Kierkegaard, who tried to warn us back in the 1840s that we were moving into an age of advertising where there would no longer be any substance in the world of ideas. I've taken the intuition of Carl Jung, the naughty little devil. We'll have to discipline him a little bit, but his ideas are brilliant and they're so necessary. I've brought the universal scriptures that Aldous Huxley wrote about, the time-space ideas of Albert Einstein, and some of the mythological ideas of Joseph Campbell, his ideas of the hero's journey and such, and we'll have to straighten out Joe a bit as well. Not everyone is perfect. We include in Universal Grammar of Story the beautiful ideas of Robert Bly, because we couldn't call this mythopoetic without him. And we'll throw in a few neuroscientists to boot. I love these ideas, and I was honored to gather them for you. But they aren't enough. They come from a very narrow focus of human life. And to evolve the grammar for the reality of the wider world, to be able to call it universal, I had to make a change. I had to get away from my own culture. I had to get outside of baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie and move into a totally alien terrain. So I went to Kyrgyzstan, along with my husband, who was directing a massive food security program. Now, of course, everyone knows what Kyrgyzstan is, especially my American listeners who remember this well from their geography classes. It is surrounded by Kazakhstan, China, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and it's 70 miles north as the crow flies from Afghanistan, and it's only a few hundred miles from what is considered geographically the most remote place on Earth. But it wasn't altogether foreign to me. I grew up in a cowboy family, and I performed in rodeos and shodeos. I've got a few ribbons to brag about from my childhood. And these are horse people too. But instead of roping cattle, they wrestle over a headless goat at a dead gallop. It's kind of a rugby version of polo. I taught at the American University of Central Asia, in a building that formerly was the headquarters of the Soviet Communist Party. My students were largely Muslim. They had a communist perspective in their education, and they spoke a Turkic language. As a part of my teaching, I was required to teach Marx to Marxists, which I thought was funny, and so did they. We had a lot of good laughs all the way around. This is the world's most liberal Muslim country, where you can see women in short skirts next to women in full abaya and hijab. The police officer who directed traffic on my block would stand out in the middle of the street in her police uniform that was a very short skirt. Believe me, all the traffic paid attention to her. But I also taught it outside of the university classroom. I taught it to older people, to younger people. I taught it at a polytechnic high school. But more important to me than teaching it was to learn from them. So I asked them how this fit into the world as they saw it, and what I could do to make it better. And then I asked them the magical question: what compels us to write? What blocks us from writing? What makes some stories great? And most importantly, how can we get a story to write itself? It can be such hard work at times. And in the end, the grammar worked in a place so very different than where I had come from. Unfortunately, the political stability did not work. There was a violent revolution while we were there and an overthrow of the government. These are the revolutionaries pouring into the White House. We had to leave very quickly on short notice on one of the last flights before the country borders were closed down. After that, I needed a calm, quiet place to rest and recover and let my nerves settle down. Somewhere where I knew I would be unpestered by the greater outer world. And so I went to Saudi Arabia. That's me on the left in my teaching clothes. This was the world's most conservative Muslim country. I taught at a women's university deep in the desert, remote, far from everything. Here are images of my students and me arriving for class. While I didn't see any horses there, I did find something very familiar. The oldest known copy of Aristotle's Poetics is in Arabic in the Arab world. It had been taken there at the close of the Dark Ages when the Spaniards drove the Muslims and the Jews out of Europe. The scholars of those retreating communities grabbed up the precious manuscripts they could from the ancient Greeks and preserved them for us. And another amazing point of familiarity came in being among the Bedouin women. Their life was very similar to my own, living as a child in a Kentucky clan. But best of all, I found that the grammar worked, and it got even better with their insight and deep wisdom. But unfortunately, the political stability did not work. Within just a few short weeks after our arrival, the Arab Spring unfolded and difficulties came to the kingdom. This afforded me some amazing experiences because we were not able to just leave like we had in Kyrgyzstan, and we stayed 2 years. During that time, we traveled through the country, we camped in the desert, we stayed among the Bedouin people, and I learned about their ideas of storytelling.